Okay, so today we're going to solve equations using quadratic methods. Okay. And these are kind of helpful guidelines that you can follow if you think it will make it easier. Uh-oh. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is you want to see if it can be solved using the square root property. That's usually the quickest. Okay, and that's, for example, if you have one that's, let's say 3x plus 2 squared equals 5 or something like that, where you can just square root both sides. Okay. Now, if you can't solve it this way, then you just put it in quadratic form. Let's write the equation. In ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 form. Okay. So third step is just try to solve using whatever factoring method you want. So try to solve using the desired factoring method. Okay. Now, if you can't factor it this way, then you want to use either the completing the square or quadratic formula. Factoring cannot easily done. Use quadratic formula. Uh-oh. Or completing the square. Or you can start off with those if you want to. Unless it's specified in the question to use a certain method. For these, you can use whatever method you want. right. Okay, so first example, just a quick review of the square root property. So let's say if we want to solve 3x equals the square root of 8x plus 1. Okay. So you can either square root both sides, you can square both sides. In this case, you just square both sides. Okay, so if you have 3x equals the square root of 8x plus 1, and you just go ahead and square both sides, you end up with, uh-oh, got my square up there, 3x squared, bless you, which is 9x squared. For here, the square and the square root cancels each other out, equals 8x plus 1. So your second step is you want to put it in quadratic form. So bring everything to one side and make it equal 0. So if we subtract 8x from both sides, we end up with 9x squared minus 8x. Then subtract 1 from both sides, minus 1 equals 0. Okay, so you can use whatever method you want to factor. Since it didn't specify it had to be a certain way, I'll use the A times C method. Okay, so we know that A is equal to 9, B is equal to negative 8, and your C is equal to negative 1. Excuse me. So your A times C is 9 times negative 1, which is negative 9. Okay. So we have to find two numbers that multiply to equal negative 9, and those same two numbers add to equal negative 8. Okay. So it looks like negative 9 and 1. Works for both of them. Okay. And then we rewrite that, replacing it with those two numbers. So we end up with 9x squared minus 9x plus 1x minus 1 equals 0. Okay. Now we just take the greatest common factor from those two. These two we can factor out of 9x. And we're left with x minus 1. These two we can factor out a positive 1. We're left with x minus 1. Okay, so we have our common binomial, so we go ahead and factor that out. So we have x minus 1, and you can go ahead and draw a line through that once you do. Then what's left goes in the other parentheses. So we have 9x plus 1 equals 0. Okay. So you have it factored out. You just set both of them equal to 0. So x minus 1 will equal 0, or 9x plus 1 equals 0. Okay, so that means x can equal 1, or if we subtract 1 from both sides, we have 9x equals negative 1. Divide both sides by 9. X equals negative 1/9. Uh-oh, bring that up some. All right. So any questions on this one? All right. Right. Okay, so let's say, for example, if you have a leading term, is x to the fourth power. Okay. So let's say, for example, if we have to solve x to the fourth minus 3x squared minus 4 equals 0. Okay. So for this one, the first thing you want to notice is that x to the fourth power is equal to x squared squared. Okay. So you just rewrite it as x squared squared minus 3x squared minus 4 equals 0. Okay. So once you rewrite it, you temporarily change that x squared to another variable. And we'll pick y. You can pick n, you can pick any variable you want. And the only reason we did that is because now, instead of x squared squared, we have y squared minus 3y minus 4 equals 0. Which is a little easier to handle. Okay, so you have anything in front of the y squared, so we'll see if we can pick two numbers that multiply to equal our c. Those same two numbers add to equal our b. Okay, so it looks like -4 and 1 will work. So that means this can be factored into y minus 4 times y plus 1 equals 0. Okay. Let me just solve it by setting both of those equal to 0. Okay, so y minus 4 equals 0, or y plus 1 equals 0. Okay, so we add 4 to both sides. We know that y is equal to 4. We subtract 1 from both sides. Here we have y equals -1. Okay. So we're like 95% done, because remember, we still have to substitute the x squared into y, because that change is just temporary. So now we just change y back to x squared. Okay, so that gives us, instead of this, that gives us x squared equals 4. And this one gives us x squared equals -1. Okay, by the square root property, you square root both sides. We have x equals positive or negative square root of 4 is 2. And this one, you square root both sides. You have x equal positive or negative, well, square root of -1, which we know that square root of -1 is equal to I. Okay, so all of your solutions will include x can equal -2, +2, -I, and +I. All right, so any questions on that one? Okay. Okay, so that's if your leading term is x to the fourth power. What if your leading term is a polynomial? Okay, so for example, what if you want to solve 4t plus 2 squared minus 30 4t plus 2 plus 224 equals 0. Okay, so it's already in quadratic form. Everything's on the left side. It equals 0. Now the one thing you don't want to do is separate this, FOIL it out, and do all of that other stuff, because it's just a whole lot of work. Makes it a whole lot longer. But instead, temporarily replace 4t plus 2 with, and we'll pick y again. You could have picked x if you want to, but we'll just pick y. Okay, so that means instead of 4t plus 2 squared minus 30 4t plus 2 plus 225 equals 0, we end up with y squared minus 30y plus 225 equals 0.
Don't you mean 224?
Nope, 224. I don't know why I put 225. Thank you. That would have made a big difference when I got ready to solve it. Alright, so you can pick any method to solve it. I'll pick the quadratic formula to solve this one. Okay. So we have y equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, where we know our a is equal to 1, our b is equal to negative 30, and our c is equal to 224. Okay, so if we plug everything in, we have negative 30 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's negative 30 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a, which is 2 times 1. Okay, so this would give us minus, well, negative and negative is positive, so you have 30 plus or minus the square root. Negative 30 squared is 900 minus 224 times 4, that's 896, all over 2 times 1 is just 2. Okay, so this, actually make sure I bring down the y. It gives us 30 plus or minus square root of 4 over 2, which simplifies to y equals 30 plus or minus, well, we can say plus 2. Go ahead and separate it now. So 30 plus 2 over 2, or y equals 30 minus 2 over 2. Okay, so here if we draw a little separator, we have 30 plus 2, so y equals 32 over 2, which is 16, or y equals 28 over 2, which is 14. Okay, so bringing everything back over here. So y equals 16 or y equals 14. Okay. So once again, we're almost done because we have to substitute back to 4t plus 2. Okay, so instead of y equals 16, that now becomes 4t plus 2 equals 16. And instead of y equals 14, that becomes 4t plus 2 equals 14. Kind of separate that a little bit. Okay. Now we just solve for t. We subtract 2 from both sides. Those two cancel out. So we end up with 4t equals 14. Divide both by 4. We have t equals 14 over 4, which is 7 over 2. Okay, and here we subtract 2 from both sides. We end up with 4t equals 12. Divide both sides by 4. We have t equals 12 over 4, which is 3. All right, so any questions on that one? Okay. Now what if you run across 1? Your exponent is a fraction. Okay. Let's say, for example, you have 2m to the 2/3 power minus 2 equals 3m to the 1/3 power. Okay. So the first thing you want to do is you want to put it in quadratic form. So you want to move everything to one side and make it equal 0. Okay, so you have 2m to the 2/3 power minus 2. I'll write it this way it won't. If we subtract 3m to the 1/3 from both sides, we'll end up with, that becomes 0. So you have 2m to the 2/3 minus 3m to the 1/3 power minus 2 equals 0. Okay, so now if you have everything to one side, the one thing you want to notice is that m to the 2/3 power is equal to m to the 1/3 power squared. Okay, so you can rewrite this once again. And that becomes 2 to the m to the 1/3 power squared minus 3m to the 1/3 power minus 2 equals 0. Okay. So just like before, you temporarily let m to the 1/3 equal y. Well, let's say replace m to the 1/3 with y. Okay, so now that 2 times m to the 1/3 squared, that becomes 2y squared minus 3y minus 2 equals 0. Okay, so now we can go ahead and factor this however we like. And normally if the numbers are this small, I go ahead and use the quadratic formula again. Okay, so we solve. So we have y equals negative, let me actually identify your x, y, and z first before I do that. Okay, I mean not x, y, and z, a, b, and c. A equals 2. Your b equals negative 3. And your c equals negative 2. Okay, so we know that y is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, which is equal to negative b, it's just negative 3, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's negative 3 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 2, all over 2a, which is 2 times 2. Okay, so we end up with negative and negative is positive, so that's positive 3, plus or minus the square root, negative 3 squared is positive 9, minus 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. You have a negative and negative is positive, so that's plus 16 over 4. Oh, let me put my y here. Okay, so that means y is equal to 3 plus or minus the square root of 25 over 4. Okay, so that gives us y equals 3 plus 5 over 4, or y equals 3 minus 5 over 4. Okay, so here, if y is equal to 3 plus 5 over 4, means y is equal to 8 over 4, which is 2. Or y is equal to 3 minus 5 is negative 2 over 4, which is negative 1/2. Okay, so we have y equals 2 and y equals negative 1/2. Kind of separate that a little bit. Okay, so now just like before, we replace our y with what we replaced it with in the first place, which in this case is m to the 1/3 power. Oh, move that up some. So replace y with m to the 1/3 power. So this becomes m to the 1/3 power equals 2. And this becomes m to the 1/3 power equals negative 1/2.